Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Michelle Graff, and I'm the editor in chief at National Jeweler. I'm pleased to welcome you to the latest episode of My Next Question, National Jeweler's webinar series sponsored by RDI Diamonds. Today's session is hosted by our senior editor, Brecken Brandstrader, and features three guests: Kimberly Collins, owner of Kimberly Collins Colored Gems, Roland Schlusel, co-owner of Pillar and Stone International, and Stuart Robertson, vice president of Gemworld International. Kimberly, Roland, and Stuart, thank you so much for being with us today. Before I turn the discussion over to Brecken and her guests, I just want to let our attendees know that if they have a question, they can type it into the Zoom Q&A box at the bottom of their screens. I'm going to come back on at the end of the discussion to facilitate the Q&A. Also, today's session is being recorded and will be available on the National Jeweler website this coming Friday, June 11th. Now I'll turn it over to Brecken to get things started. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Michelle. And thank you, of course, to our panelists for being here today. I'm, of course, joined by three colored stone experts, and I'm really happy to be here with them because it's been a while, as I was saying earlier, since I've been able to have a more in-depth conversation and look at how the market's been doing. We've heard a lot about how fine jewelry's been selling during the pandemic. As we know, consumers are much more comfortable now buying jewelry online, but I'll be really curious to hear what you all have gleaned in the past year about gems specifically. So as we know, it's been more than a year since the colored stone market has been able to meet physically in a big way. So I wanted to start by asking you three, from what you've been seeing, how has the health of the sector been over the past year or so, and what's activity been like? And I'll just throw it to Kim to start, I think.
Thank you for having me, Brecken, and I'm really excited to be part of this today. I think the market's been pretty gangbusters. It surprised me. I didn't expect it. I think there are probably quite a few people in my shoes that thought, wow, what is going on here? But it has been such a pleasant surprise in light of everything else going on. So I think the activity, I keep joking, it's like Christmas and this month, that month. And granted, I'm not on the road. I'm not traveling like I normally do. I'm, not doing as many trade shows. But, my office is busy. People are selling things. My clients are selling things, and I'm shipping every day. And that's really exciting. So.
Yeah, great news.
Yeah.
And Roland, I'm going to throw it to you. What have you been seeing out there in the past year or so?
So, yeah, the past, let's go back 15 months. The first few months everybody was scared. It did not drop a little bit, it dropped to zero. And then suddenly it started to open, but we soon realized that, like Kimberly said, well, the people that really have money, it's what they always said, have Christmas and anniversary and birthday every single day of the year.
Yeah. So do you guys attribute it to people, putting that money towards gems and jewelry as they're not able?
Yes, I mean, there was less competition from other sectors, especially from expensive events, traveling on vacation and so on. But I was talking to Stuart, I think 2 days ago, even yesterday, and then I said, I discovered actually during this pandemic with the business what the biggest luxury is. And I said to Stuart, it's time. And now that it opens again, I have my calls that already dropped by 50%. People have no time anymore. They are on the road, they are driving to the office, they are going back. Before last year, at least from summer to 2 months ago, I had the loose stone is a semi-product, right? It's not a finished product. So people had time. They said, oh, yeah, you make me a drawing. I come next week. Oh, yeah, then no problem. We give it to the jeweler. I come in 2 weeks to pick it up. No problem. Now they don't have time.
Right. That's interesting. Thank you, Roland. Stuart, how does that compare to what you're seeing? Along the same lines?
Yeah, pretty much along the same lines. I think, to Roland's point, at the beginning of this, we saw, a lot of people concerned because businesses were closed. Just in our office, we were back at the end of April of last year in the office because we're not working with the public, doing our surveys, and there were still a lot of jewelers that were closed. but we were hearing from some of the people that we are regularly in contact with that are advisors, and also people that we just have had access to their inventories in the past, that they were finding many of them were already in the process of really going into a fairly good investment into e-commerce before this started. So those that were able to transfer basically the in-store experience into an online type of presentation continued to do business and did actually quite well towards the end of the year. The other thing we found, though, that the pandemic in itself seemed to do is it really expose the extent to which the industry is dependent on other sectors of support for moving our products around. And this is something that obviously I think Roland or Kimberly would be better able to speak to, but the logistics of our industry in getting products back and forth became very much a deciding factor on how people could fill orders. And the bottom line was companies that were well stocked did well last year. Those that had to chase after stones to fill orders did not.
Yeah, great point. And you did mention, I wanted to go back to talk about the digital aspect of that, because Stuart, you and I talked earlier this year when we were I was working on a story about the impact of not having a Tucson in the traditional sense, and some of the bigger trade facing shows showing up. And we were saying that because people about a year into that, by that point, had already adapted their digital business, that the impact of not being in Tucson was sort of mitigated in that sense. So Kim and Roland, I'm curious from your perspective as well, how you were connecting to your clients and how people were responding to sort of a digital business in that way, what they responded best to.
Ladies first.
Thank you. So in the beginning, when everything was pretty much shut down, I started with an email to my client base and basically said, I'm here. And I'm here if you just want to chat. I'm here if you want to speculate, talk about what we think could happen, how long this is going to go on. Basically, I just opened myself up because people weren't walking into stores at that point. Nobody knew what was going to happen. But I had a lot of great outreach. People just picked up the phone and talked. And I spent a lot of time. I was busy talking. And I think that carried through. It really helped me move through. The other thing I did, I was just active in my social media. My Instagram is a real driving force for me. I do some on Facebook, but Instagram for me is more, it's just so current for me. I use it every day. And so I had a lot more people connecting with me that way on Instagram. And, some people were texting me through Instagram saying, I look forward to your posts every day. You mix it up, and chitty chatting with people that I had never really, I knew, but I hadn't spoken with before. Mm-hmm. And that was really fun. And that really got me through. And I was making some sales that way. And I'm so grateful for the people that I did connect with. It made it fun. It felt like we were all in it together. The people that wanted to engage were there. And the people that were trying to do business and figuring out how to do it were also there. Can I share this? Do you mind if I share this? Whether it be one of my posts, and I'm like, go share ahead. We're all in this together. And that was really my attitude, is like, what can we do to help each other in this industry? How can we make sales together and support our fellow members in the industry? So for me, social media on all aspects, whether the phone, Instagram, Facebook, or just email, all of those, I was using all of them, all the platforms.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And you said it was a great year, right? So people clearly are comfortable using those platforms and reaching out and buying that way as well.
It made it fun and exciting.
Yeah, that's great. And Roland, what about you?
Yeah, so first of all, we had an approach where, at the beginning, everybody was on one side a little bit scared about the whole situation. And the first thing was not to panic and not to drop everything what you did right in the past 20 or 30 years, but going on with your strength and use that. what we also know, and we know that from the past, it takes a little bit energy to get back a client from the past and activate your clients that you have. But it takes a lot of energy to get new clients. And so with that approach, what we did, instead of completely changing our business on a digital platform, we took the phone first. How are you? And so on. And yes, we also, for the first time, used Instagram. My wife did the whole job with Instagram, and she does a very good job. And we don't work with privates, so we were a little bit scared that we would get all these privates that would just contact us. That's not what happened. All our contacts were actually members of the industry and reactivated clients that we had in the past 15 years. And the strongest impact actually was not even on the other side of the world, but quite locally in California and extended California and so on. So this was very good. There are two sides of the digital platform. One side is from us back to the mine, and one is forward to the client. So these are two very different things. We have seen that you cannot replace trade shows, and you still have to see the merchandise. We tried a lot of things to even with companies that we work together since 20 years. We made the experience that you have at the end to have the stone in front of you to decide about the purchase.
Right.
I mean, if the problem, for example, for a client is a little bit different and saying, I just need an aquamarine ring, and I have a budget, maybe it works, yes. But for me, looking for a certain type of color of aquamarine with this type of greenish inside or no greenish inside and so on, you have to see the stone.
Okay. Very good. Thank you, Roland. And to talk a little bit about trends, of course, I would usually use Tucson as sort of the chance to get a grasp on what the market is really looking for and what stones are hot and what we can expect in the next year or so. So let me ask you guys about what you've been seeing in the past year, a little over. I mean, are there any specific stones or cuts or colors that have really stood out to you guys in terms of what people are looking for? If anybody in particular wants to start, you can go ahead.
Well,
I will. Oh, go ahead, Stuart. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that it seems we actually saw probably a broader range of interest this year. And I think a lot of what drove it was simply that, I don't know, maybe this is just specific to the pandemic, but people basically, when material was available, people bought it because dealers were warning clients all through this that it would be difficult to replace things, and dealers were having difficulty replacing things. So as far as general trends go, I think one of the strongest things we saw moving were garnets. We also saw an increased interest in spinel, but we also saw a lot of other things. Aquamarine is done fairly well, certain color ranges, but what we didn't see a lot of, and sapphires, especially some of the so-called fancy colors, but these were things that people were requesting, but they weren't always things that were selling, because if they weren't here, there was a lot of difficulty sourcing them from overseas offices where they may have been, such stones like podpracha and things like this. So there are actually two questions there. The things that actually were selling were things that we see a fair amount of in the United States in inventories of dealers, sapphire, garnet, tourmaline, things like this. I would think probably Roland or Kimberly would have more specifics, but as to what they've actually worked with. But yeah, what we didn't see a lot of were things like better end ruby and things like this.
Yeah.
I would agree with a lot of what Stuart said. The stone that just jumps out is Teal Sapphire, Teal Mermaid Sapphire. They're calling it all different names now, but Montana's, they're all in that same color hue. It just seems people were just combing the internet to find something cool.
Mhm.
And although that was already hot before COVID, I mean, it started before COVID, it just, I mean, every single day in my office, I'm getting calls. I do a lot with fancy sapphires across the range in colors, but the teals have been strong and stronger for sure. And like Stuart was saying, getting more production, getting new stones from overseas, getting things from Montana. It's been rough. It's been rough. In Montana, the mines closed down for a good portion of the year due to weather. And just being able to resupply yourself, it's rough. And so, I mean, that's where I was saying there's been just a lot of support in the industry. I've worked with some dealers that, I mean, I've called dealers, say, hey, I know you usually carry this. Do you have this? I have a client for this, where I never had done that before. And I'm getting calls from other dealers. Kim, I know you carry this or this, and can you help me out? And I loved that about what went on this year, is just the camaraderie within the industry was really fabulous. In addition to the teals and the sapphire, he's right about spinel, gray spinel, so hot. I'd also concur with the garnets. I mean, kind of across the board, people were interested in seeing color. And that's what made it so exciting, is it doesn't really matter what you put up on your Instagram, as long as it's a good picture and, you know, you're able to romance the stone a little bit, people got enticed. And that carried forward to the end consumer. And so I feel like something very interesting happened in our industry this year. And I feel that that is a big positive of what came out of all the negative that was going on. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I love hearing that. And plenty of people did say that too when I was talking to them around the time of Tucson, that there was sort of like a banding together in terms of, you know, helping each other source stuff and like sort of holding on pricing, which we'll come back to that conversation too, because I want to see what you guys have there. But, you know, sort of just leaning on each other and making it through.
Yeah,
So that's great to hear. Thank you, Kim. And Roland, what have you been seeing in the past year or so?
Yeah, there are different trends depending where they come from. You know, on one side you have the supply chain that produces trends, because you cannot have huge requests from something that the end consumer doesn't know exists or is not even available. On the other hand, we have also a trend that we have to see: do we get calls that we did not get before? Yes. For example, the fact that the Brazilians are not at the shows with their acres of aquamarines and so on, we get the calls for aquamarine at the moment. And this probably will be over after the COVID. They will be back at the shows, and they will supply that type of the market. But I think the two main things that we saw, one was a continuation of the past few years that is stronger and stronger, is more brightness and putting the color as number two choice. Going to the store and saying, oh, I want a nice blue stone, but it has to be bright. Okay, it can be a blue zircon, it can be a pastel blue or whatever, but it has to be bright. The time of the highly saturated dark blue sapphire and dark emeralds and so on is at the moment is over. The other major trend is that this whole COVID situation and disrupting of the market and the supply brought actually in our business more diversity. It brought a diversity where people said, I'm open for any stones as long as it's approximately this color. And then suddenly people discovered, oh, I didn't know the garnet can have this color. I didn't know this berry that has this color and so on. So I think these are the most important trends that we experience.
That's very interesting, Roland. Thank you for sharing that.
And, you know, Brecken, one more thing I thought of is shapes. You kind of asked about colors, but the shapes have gone crazy. It's like kind of old school, but I mean, from the geometric shapes like hexagons Pear shapes are hot, marquise are hot, emerald cuts are hot. You know, in addition, of course, round is always classic, and oval's been very hot in alt bridal. But all the interesting, I'd call them more funky shapes, are back again. And so I feel like anything goes right now. Color is hot across the board, but so are shapes. So it really goes along with what, you know, they say art is in the eye of the beholder. Well, gems, jewelry, that's art. And I believe that in more than I ever have, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of felt like over the past few years in Tucson, when I would talk to people more and more, they would say, oh, here are these alternative cuts. You know, we've got these geo, I always think of Eric Braunwald at Columbia Gen House, and these geo cuts and these different things that are selling well. So in a year when you have people who are increasingly looking for, you know, they've got the luxury of time, they're looking for something that's very different because they can shop around and educate themselves. I'm happy to hear that it's sort of adding to this, to these trends of, you know, different stuff. And
Yeah.
It even goes a step further, is that the client trusts us to choose for him the cut and the shape. You know, it's not that they say, I want it. And this is part of this diversity, that the request comes in a different way, where they say, I don't care as long as it's no heat. I want just a stone with natural color, like a sea green or whatever. I just want a natural color. And you end up taking a rough piece and making a funky shape that they call baroque, and it sells.
That's cool. That's a lot of fun for you guys, getting to have that freedom.
Yeah.
So let's talk about pricing too. We mentioned this before, but I wanted to go back to this and you know, sort of see what you guys are seeing in terms of what price ranges people are really shopping in, and they have been for the past year. Stuart, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Okay. Yeah, what we saw, Brecken, was actually a number of interesting things. Probably the most notable is that we saw very little activity in what would be considered like the promotional and commercial quality of products that we usually see. Actually, they're lower price points, but they tend to move. I think that particular client base that appeals to was the hardest hit by the pandemic. Where we did see things more active were the mid-tier and upper level price points, and everything has gone up in price. And I think probably Roland or Kimberly would be able to speak to better about why, but we're seeing price points even on materials that used to be in $1,500, $2,000 type of sales at wholesale. Those same goods are more, and actually considerably more today than they were just 16 months ago. Active price points, just from some of the transaction data we're collecting. It depends a lot on where somebody is in the market, but still there's kind of that core group where you see activity between about 1,500 and maybe 25 to 3,000, and then you see it pick up again somewhere 7,000 and above. But the 100, the 50 and $100 type of transactions we used to see a lot of. This is not at all what it seems to be moving at the moment. I think that's just a reflection of who was hardest hit during the pandemic and who was the recipient of the growth in the stock market and all of the stimulus that got pumped out.
Right. Okay. And Kim and Roland, from, you know, the wholesale perspective, what have you guys been seeing in pricing?
Go ahead, Roland.
Up across the board, the lower the price point, the higher the percentage went up. There are two reasons. The two main reasons are sustainability, on the other hand, puts pressure on the merchandise that is not expensive. Sustainability on a $2 million ruby, you know, it's going to make you a difference of 0.5% at the price at the end. But on a Chalcedony beads, it's going to make 500%. And on a tourmaline, it's probably 100%. Same thing is with logistics. The shipping companies and insurance took their time, and they had a lot of time on their hand last year to review their whole process of billing, of pricing, and so on and so on. And they came out not with lower prices, but with substantially higher prices.
Ah,
And somewhere it has to be paid for. So it's going on the product.
mhm.
And I have to tell you, for the first time, I made a list. And I normally use three ways of shipping. Okay, probably everybody knows what it is, depending on the value. Three. Now the prices have gone up so much that I made a list here with 20 of them, and depending on the value and where it has to go, I choose. So yeah, they put themselves in a position where we have to start to look at competition.
Okay. Fantastic. Thank you.
I agree with what both of them are saying. When you talk about supply, that's where it all starts. It's harder to get goods. And I mean, currently in Sri Lanka, they're back in lockdown. And I had some things that were going to be shipped to me. And it seems all the prices have gone up considerably from what I bought last time I saw them. It's expected because they're not mining and it's still in demand. And so they're not mining much. They are still mining when they can, but it is supply and demand and people are willing to pay for it. And that's the difference I've seen here. I've had two things happen. Some things I felt were less expensive. People that needed to move some inventory were willing to move at a less expensive price. But what happens then is then they can't resupply. And so if you don't price adjust, you're just shooting yourself in the foot for a later time. But the high end stuff, it's significantly more expensive than what they were mentioning, rubies and finer sapphires, no heats, things like Podparasha. I haven't been able to get a pod. I have an outstanding pod for a year, and it is a certain color, it's a certain shape. It's one of those things. I've combed the market in the US and I've been working with them overseas, but I just can't get it. And they've warned me, Kim, if I find it, the prices are going to be higher. I'm like, I don't care. I need the stone. I have somebody that's waiting to buy it. But again, nobody wants to pay higher, but it's a good problem to have because we have demand and we
Right.
have people that want to buy these finer gemstones and and throw gold prices in with all this too. That's been kind of crazy too.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
Yeah.
but the demand is there. So
Yeah, Kimberly says it right. The terrible thing is not only that we get the calls for these paparachas and mahengi spinners and so, is that you don't get the stones.
yeah.
Mhm.
And
Right.
actually, even without COVID, we would not get the stones. If you would try now to find a non-windowed paparacha, for example, a nice paparacha without a window that is not cut too flat, or a nice mahengi spinel, even without COVID, these are the new paraibas. You just don't get them.
Right. Okay, so keeping all of this in mind, Kim and Roland, I'm going to start with you two on this. What are your expectations for the rest of 2021 and how you think it's going to go?
I think Stuart mentioned this earlier, or maybe it was Roland. I think as people travel this summer, which I know is going to happen, I have plenty of friends I know that have vacations booked through the end of the year. I think we're going to take a little bit of a hit, but so far I haven't felt it. But I'm expecting it to happen. But I think we're going to go back to different ways of business. Trade shows are starting up. It's a packed fall. I mean, we have Vegas show. Right after that, we have the new Denver show. We have select shows are starting up. I can name drop. Centurion. It just happened. Conclave is going to happen. So we have other ways that we're going to be able to sell, whether it's through the office. I think people are going to stock up for a good Christmas. I don't know. The last Christmas was tremendous. I don't know that we can beat that, but I sure hope so.
Yeah. How do you feel, Roland?
Um, Two main things. On one thing, yes, we are going to go a little bit down because factor time and competition again from people want to travel. They have not been traveling for most of them actually now for 2 years because pandemic started in winter time and not in summer. Um, so yes, we are going to find a little bit, but you know what? On one side, many people have rediscovered the gemstone.
Yeah.
They have lost the connection to color the last few years, and were sitting behind their computer and cell phone and looking at some color and so on. But that is what amazes me the most. We had a lockdown with retailers, and the moment they open, and many are open actually since August, they had never so many clients.
Right.
Because people were not traveling. I mean, you go to a good store on a Saturday, it is packed.
Right.
And jewelry stores have not been packed for the last 20 years. So this is a reconnection actually to the brick and mortar store, which is very good. And I have to tell you, frankly, I was more scared of the online competition against my company that before COVID than now.
Really?
No, yes, I know now that people need to see the stuff. We are not like a car dealership where you go to the car dealership, you sit in the car, you go home and order it online. Because the car that you sit in, you can order it in the next few years. Once you felt it, it's always the same. The car is always the same. The phone is always the same. And all these products are always the same, but not colored gemstones.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. And Stuart, I want to get your opinion, of course, about sort of expectations for the rest of the year. But I wanted to go back to a point you and I had a conversation right around Tucson, which was when we were talking about, I asked you about the health of the U.S. market, and you mentioned that, to put it into perspective, it was doing okay, but in part because of the COVID disruption, had moved from east to west, and has sort of disrupted our supply chain in the same way as well. So the U.S. market had less competition with those markets that had closed, which I think we talked about earlier. So as some of those markets slowly start to reopen, what are your thoughts about the remainder of the year and the potential impacts that might have on the sector, especially the U.S. market?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, Brecken. What we're seeing developing now is that there is going to be support for the current level of prices, and they're probably going to move higher for a lot of the reasons that Roland and Kimberly have been talking about. And this is going to increase the instances of color substitution that we're seeing in the market. When Roland was talking about somebody coming in and requesting more if it's similar to a color as opposed to a particular price point or type of stone, this type of color substitution is going to continue because more and more things are going to seem expensive to consumers because they're not going to be readily available in really the top end when we talk about things like fine ruby and stuff. And I think that part of that is going to be, the fact that the Western markets like the US and parts of Europe are emerging from this at this point. But a lot of the countries that produce gem materials, especially in the colored stone space, are not yet emerging from it. There are, big concerns. Everybody knows what's happening in parts of India and in Sri Lanka and now in Kenya and Tanzania and stuff. There are real concerns about the rate at which COVID is not only itself spreading, but new variants are. So extracting the human toll from this discussion and just talking specifically in terms of the market, unfortunately, and it is unfortunate, but the reality is we're going to be right now in a cycle where the supply chain will not catch up quickly. The glut in material that I had initially thought could potentially occur if the market started to open up from the east before the west was buying could develop. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
going to see the end of the year come with higher prices still. And I think that it reminds me of something. Over the last 2 years, I've had the same thing told to me by two different people, John Bradshaw at Coast to Coast and Eric Brunward at Columbia Gem House. The time to buy material is when it's available. And they're going to both be proven correct, because anybody that built decent stock as opposed to just running their business from memo, anybody that built up stock before this point would be in a very good position, because we are not going back, in my opinion, to the prices that were in place in the Tucson immediately before the pandemic became a concern in the United States, because you don't unring a bell. Even the things Roland talked about the logistics, now that they've moved those prices higher, those sectors, those companies will not lower their price. They may come down a little bit, but they're not going back to pre-COVID levels. So I think in general, the market is going to see stronger prices. And as a result, it's going to increase the opportunity for a lot of other gem materials to be, basically become mainstream, so to speak. And it's interesting. In your opening remarks, you were talking about fine jewelry, and it's interesting because I see colored gemstones as fine jewelry. I see diamonds. I mean, obviously I have a perspective that's skewed, but diamonds to me are like a loaf of white bread. Every slice is the same. Colored gemstones, though, they're the multi-grain that there's a lot of different things in there, all adding up to a healthy marketplace. So, I think we're going to see more interest in a lot of things that in the past we've not really considered mainstream colored gemstones.
Right. Okay. Very interesting. Thank you, Stuart. Let's talk about trade shows really quickly. What do you guys think that the trade shows will be like for the rest of the year? Kim and Roland, I know you guys are both going to be exhibitors in Vegas. We talked a little bit about this beforehand. So do you think buyers will be at the shows that are able to happen this year? Or do you think that the next really impactful event might be Tucson and possibly Hong Kong in 2022?
There will be national buyers, not international buyers. And for all the reasons that we already mentioned. So, but there will be buyers there, and there will be good buyers that are willing to buy. They need merchandise. It's not only the dealers that worked well in the last 8 months. The stores did well. Somebody has had a good store. They worked well. They are going to want to replace the merchandise, and they will be there. And on the other hand, we have to see now that we will be there with a booth, but who else will be there with a booth? We are going to have less competition. We don't know how long it's going to take, for example, in Brazil to get rid of this virus. They have been very hardly hit since 3-4 months, and it's not so far really getting better. Are we going to see the Brazilian show up in Tucson? I'm not so sure about that. So it reminds me. I said to my kids are 10 and 13 years old. I said to my kids 1 month ago, can you imagine who would have ever thought that we would almost run out of ketchup in the United States? And it almost happened, right? And I have a friend. He works he does watch cases for the watch industry, and he's in gold and platinum. He said, you know what? I have the gold, I have the platinum, I have the machine, I have the electricity, I have the workers, but I can't do anything. You know why? I don't get the oil for the machines.
Oh.
You have to imagine. And that's what means a disrupted supply chain. So yes, buy when it's here. We do not know what is going to happen in the next few months.
Right. Kim or Stuart, you guys want to add anything to that?
I would. So I took the risk and I exhibited in Atlanta last October and again this past March. And I was hesitant about October. I wasn't sure it was the wisest decision, but I needed some business. Okay. And I went for it. The Atlanta Jewelry Show did an unbelievable job. And it was like no other trade show I'd ever exhibited at. And from the perspective of the need and the buyers, the buyers were hungry. There were no tire kickers whatsoever at the trade show. Everyone that showed up to buy bought. It blew my mind. I mean, a 2-day show, they shortened the amount of days. So naturally I was excited to go in and do March. And it was, not only was it, I thought it was going to be less than October, just coming into the holidays. It was even better. And they had a wait list. People had heard about fall, from the exhibitor side, I'm speaking right now.
Mhm.
They had a wait list, but again, the buyers were hungry. They needed stuff. And like Roland has been saying, they needed to see it. They wanted to see it face to face. Okay.
Mhm.
I was personally disappointed we didn't have a AGTA Tucson in April. I kind of was pushing for that. I thought we were ready, but it's okay, because I think this fall is going to be great. I think it's going to be a little more unpredictable. I think there's a lot of people super enthusiastic to go to Vegas. And my opinion is this: after doing Atlanta, the people that want to be there and need product are going to be there. And it doesn't matter if we have a third less people than normally show up at Vegas. Those people that are there need product, and they're anxious to connect. They're anxious to see what we have, and they're ready to buy. They need product. Okay. I think that's going to carry through the entire fall. I think you roll from that, and I'm doing AGTA Denver after that. It's only 2 weeks difference, but I'm going to be there because I think there's people that will not go to Vegas, but that'll try Denver instead. And same goes for some of those select shows going on this fall. I think Tucson 22 is going to be unbelievable. I really do, because we may still miss some of our international exhibitors. I mean, it remains to be seen, but I know as far as US based stores, I think we're going to have an excellent turnout, and the designers need new product. There's no better place to see more high-end dealers than under one roof than in Tucson. So
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
really looking forward to the end of the year, rolling into the new year, and let's all hope everyone stays healthy, and things continue to stay good and get better.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great point that people will be traveling, will be likely going for a reason, so they'll be interested in making that investment.
Absolutely.
Being serious,
Yeah.
right. Stuart, did you have anything to add before we went to our last question?
Yeah, just very quickly, I would just note that I think Tucson 2022 is probably going to be the first really strong show. Obviously these shows will all do business this year, but the real sense of reopening, I think, will be next year's Tucson show. The other consideration, though, is I'm not sure that Hong Kong maintains the position it's had with what's been going on now in Hong Kong. I think that in Far East and Eastern markets, yes, it probably will remain a destination. But if there are fundamental changes to how that show operates and whether or not you can take goods into Hong Kong duty free, as well as just the political situation forming there, I'm not sure that a lot of people from the West are going to continue to participate at the degree they have in recent years. That too, I think, bodes well for strengthening the return of Tucson as really a major international colored stone event.
I would totally agree with you, Stuart.
That's a great point, Stuart. Yeah, I'll be very interested in seeing how Tucson 2022 plays out. I mean, it's a very fluid situation on so many different accounts, so there's a lot to pay attention to throughout this year, but fantastic points. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to finish it with one more quick question, and then I'll throw it back to Michelle to see what questions we have. But I just wanted to ask you guys, what's one takeaway from the past year that you've learned as it related to the business or the colored stone market that you'd like to share with us?
I guess I would say quickly that it's demonstrated the supply chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And I think that the US market and other parts and other economies that had the ability to pump a lot of stimulus were able to really protect a lot of businesses. I think at the early phase of our supply chain in this industry, people that dig stones and miners and people that broker them and people that cut them in a lot of these areas were not as fortunate. And we should probably keep that in mind next year when we're in Tucson, that, you know, a lot of the stones we're going to see were produced by small scale independent miners and small artisan miners. And I think it's important to just keep in mind, we want to encourage an environment in which the people that do that work do so because they think it's a respectable and by choice, and not, we should really encourage everybody in the early phases of the supply chain to make the choice to do that kind of work because it is appreciated and it is financially, or at least should be financially rewarding for them to do so. That would be the big takeaway from what we're seeing as a result of the pandemic.
That's a great one. Thank you, Stuart.
I would say that the word that comes to my mind is popped into my head many times over the year is resiliency. And from the level of what Stuart is talking about, from the miners into the US market to the support we've given each other here in the US, us supporting other dealers, us supporting our retail jewelers. I'm talking industry based, but the ones that needed and wanted connection is one thing, and business is another thing. I mean, the resiliency in this industry was mind blowing, and the support and the outreach, and that makes me really proud to be in this industry because I think I found there were a lot of people there willing to support, and the same goes for overseas. And this is a trickle up environment we have. We have relationships. I've been in the business 25 years. I know people in East Africa. I know plenty of people in Sri Lanka, Thailand, Brazil, and being able to maintain those relationships and support them as well on both sides. I mean, where I stand, I'm a dealer. I have an interesting perspective because that mine sector for me is so important. I rely on that. I rely, for my successes, but I also, when you think about it, you want to make sure the people that help you out, you help as well, and vice versa. When you look at it on the other side, I want to take care of my clients, and they're selling to the retail buyer, and the resiliency within this entire industry from mine to market has been amazing this year, I think. And I'm really grateful to be in this industry.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kim. That was a great one. Okay, Roland.
Yeah, one I already mentioned. I mean, for one side, our whole industry was that worked in a traditional way was a little bit scared of this whole online development, and I have to tell you today that I'm much less scared than before. And one of the reasons is exactly what Kimberly explained. You were completely different with people on the phone or now on the Zoom because you knew the people before face to face. I would never make all these contacts and have the support and giving the support to other people if I would not have met them before in person.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like when last year we heard that, maybe there will never be school anymore because everything in the future will be school online. My reaction was immediately, then you will have no teachers. Because the teachers, they choose their profession because they love contact with kids.
Right. Very true.
And this is exactly the same. This resilience in our industry comes from that because, yes, we are not an industry that just makes paperwork or things. We have a beautiful product and we have contact with a huge diversity of people. So this is one thing. The second thing is the shows, where everybody in the last couple of years said show is a dying way of doing business. No, we know now how important the shows are, and there will be more than before. The way it happens might change a little bit and so on, but I can tell you there will be cities in the future that are going to fight to get great shows. Dubai might be one. Bangkok might be one. You know, it depends on the politics of import and export. And the last one is every financial FCO of any big company has told the last 30, 40 years that your worst financial enemy is a high inventory. And I like at the moment have his very bad enemy because he's my best friend.
Well, thank you so much for that. Thank you, everybody, for your insights. I really appreciate it. That was such a great discussion. I'm going to throw it over to Michelle really quick and see if she got any questions from the audience for us.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. That really was a great discussion. It's very, very interesting. And thanks again to our sponsor, RDI Diamonds. As a reminder, you can still type questions into the Zoom Q&A box, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. We had some submitted beforehand, and we had a couple come in during the discussion. So I'm going to work through those. While we give our listeners a couple more minutes to enter their questions, I just want to say a quick word about RDI Diamonds. RDI Diamonds, the selection you want, the quality you need. Thousands of diamonds, that's just the beginning. RDI offers a wide range of services and support to help you succeed, from flexible memo options, a partnership with De Beers Group Industry Services, to generous stock options and cost-efficient shipping. RDI's goal is to provide the highest quality of both care and diamonds to your store. Visit rdidiamonds.com today to learn more. That is rdidiamonds.com. Now let's get started with our listener questions. We had a couple questions come in that are about specific stones and specific localities. I'm going to start with this one. One listener wants to know, what is the current condition of Tanzanite supply? Are the mines in operation?
Anybody? If not, my understanding is that the mines are in operation, but the material has gotten to a depth that eliminates a lot of the smaller scale type production because it's very expensive to work. But as you know, Roland and I were talking the other day on a different subject, and he made a very good point that Tanzanite is a material that has had a very well-defined floor and ceiling for decades. It doesn't drop below a certain level, and it doesn't move ahead, higher than a certain price level. And so we do see conditions remain like that. Stones are still available in the marketplace, and they're still in the price ranges that, for the most part, they were before the pandemic. If you've got, $450 to $600, you can get a very, very nice piece of Tanzanite at the wholesale price level. That's not the situation we have with other stones in that same category, that same color range right now.
So it seems like the current condition of Tanzanite supply then is consistent. It's the same as it's always been.
In my opinion, yeah.
And I feel
Kimberly.
I was just going to say, although it's consistent, you hear, oh, they hit another pocket. There's some production coming, some new production coming out, but there is always, like Stuart just mentioned, it's somewhat consistent. There's always production on the market, at least in the last, I don't know, a decade for sure. And I would say also that the prices have stayed somewhat consistent up and down. Sometimes it's harder to get the smaller sizes like he was mentioning, but I think for finer goods, the larger goods too, it's, I haven't seen any problem right now.
Stuart before said that in the supply chain actually is only as good as the weakest link. And when you look at the moment with what's happening in many of these countries with COVID, is probably the weakest link, not the mining. But somewhere after that. What happens in the market in Arusha? What happens with the travel of the people that normally buy the large parcels of rough? So this is probably going to impact the supply of a Tanzanite, which Tanzanite is not a gemstone where you can say, oh, okay, it's not working in Africa, let's go to Brazil, or let's go to Australia, or it's one region. And if that region somewhere there is that weak link right after it, it doesn't matter if they produce or not, we are going to have problems with the material.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for that. Another question. Is the price of Burma no heat sapphire under pressure by the much lower cost of fine sapphire from alternative sources?
Well, Roland could probably address that better. I would say no, only in the context that it's a benchmark, no more than the price of fine Burma ruby is under pressure because of what's happening in any other ruby producing environment. These are benchmark stones and the prices are, they're actually considerably higher than they have been in any point in recent memory, as far as I'm aware. But maybe Roland or Kimberly would have direct experience with answering that.
First of all, we have to consider that there is no real production of Burmese sapphires around Mogok anymore. So in any case, we are there in a situation where we talk almost like not quite as rare as that, but almost like a Brazilian Paraíba tourmaline, at least a Mahenge spinel and so on. So availability anyway is very low. Then come the second factor is that we have now sanctions on the military of Myanmar. And whenever they sanction, people know I want to get what I can't get. That's what drives people. They don't buy a painting from an artist, at least not before he passes away. They buy it once he passes away. The same thing is with gemstones. People want what you cannot get, and prices are up. Prices are going up, and they will go up.
Kimberly, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I agree. We can move on. They both nailed it.
Okay. Thank you so much. We have one more Burma question, and then I'm going to move on to a consumer question. What are viable substitutes for Burmese ruby? And they did not mention, but I would assume this person is asking because of, as you just mentioned, Roland, the sanctions in place. So this listener is looking for viable substitutes for Burmese ruby. Well,
Mozambique ruby is fabulous as well, and that production is still there, and it's strong. And I mean, that's what the most of the market is gravitated towards. And plus, even before the sanctions, it was harder. It's still harder to get Burmese ruby, and now it's even more difficult. And people aren't, they're not interested in supplying it right now until the sanctions are lifted. I've been really pleased with the production of Mozambique ruby, and there's some, major companies in the US that will only sell that gemstone. I think Tiffany's is one. They are only selling Mozambique ruby.
That makes sense given Tiffany's history with that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Roland or Stuart, any thoughts, anything beyond Mozambique rubies you want to recommend?
Yeah, I mean, if there are different types of Mozambique rubies. There are some with a little bit more fluorescence, some with less fluorescence. So depending on what color type you like, there is a little bit ruby for everybody today. From the I look the Burmese ruby. People did not realize that maybe 20 years ago, but I think they realize today actually if they are really wanted to buy a Burmese ruby no heat, that they are looking for a Van Gogh or a Picasso. It's not that they're just looking for a thing to hang on the wall. For me, a real substitute of a Burmese ruby is only one substitute, much higher budget. That's it. There's nothing else. It's like a substitute for a cashmere sapphire. There's only a cashmere sapphire that is going to be more expensive, and the more people want it, the more the prices are going to go up.
Right. Very true. Stuart, any thoughts?
I would only suggest that given the current situation with what's happening in the prices of rubies, and they are getting very expensive, even from Mozambique, relative to other stones, I would consider the possibility of color substitution, look at things like spinel or other red stones, because a lot of times when people mention a variety, they're actually referring to a color. So I would explore with the client, different options that present a similar color, but probably a different price point.
Okay, yeah, no, that's a great suggestion. Thank you so much. And we're going to wrap up with this question. One of our listeners wants to know how much of the surge in jewelry buying was due to stimulus checks and the fact that people could not spend on travel?
I definitely think it's more, I mean, in the luxury industry, I think it's more the travel that affected and in a positive way, the jewelry spend, rather than the stimulus checks. In fact, I don't know personally. I think the stimulus checks put money into the economy, but maybe on a different level. But higher end, where a lot of us saw a big increase in sales in larger stones, larger, finer pieces of jewelry. I believe that is due to people not being able to take their trips to Europe and overseas, and where they'd normally spend that in the summer and the winter, they'd go skiing. People weren't doing that, so they had these larger amounts of money. And when I think of that, I'm thinking in the thousands and thousands, multiple thousands, and that really affected the higher end in our industry in a positive way.
Yeah, that makes sense. Roland or Stuart, any thoughts on that before we wrap it up?
Yes, I personally saw it with one phenomenon was the mid-February Valentine's Day, right? I always said this is the Mother's Day, Valentine's Day. This is not the positioning. It's normally where you sell a little piece of jewelry at $100, $200, and so on and so on. Maybe once $500, but that's and um, the stimulus check could not follow there or bring the results we had. Um, never. I was selling, for example, before heart shapes at Valentine's Day, and this year I didn't have enough. And when you start to sell on Valentine's Day heart shape for tens of thousands of dollars, then you realize what's happening.
Yeah.
And this is not the stimulus check. This is people that have time and people that have their birthday and yeah, they have money every day, and instead of being away for traveling, they have time to go to the jewelry store.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for being here today. This was a fantastic discussion. My next question will return next Tuesday, June 15th at 2 p.m. Eastern. Senior editor Ashley Davis will be sitting down with creative expert Simon Mortimer, who's the founder of Associates by Design. And he is going to be offering a masterclass in branding for your business. So you don't want to miss that. And I've just dropped the link into the chat for everyone who wants to register for that session. And thank you again for joining us today, and please take care.